7 stories, 7 scars. From federal courtrooms to small stages. From old diaries to a sudden tweet. Each sexual scandal in the grunge era carried its own paradox. Artists once celebrated as symbols of freedom found themselves accused of violation. Some bands collapsed overnight. Some cases dragged on for decades, moving from the courthouse to the front page. At times, humiliation itself was turned into song, like a scar exposed under the stage lights. And in other cases, rumors were never confirmed, yet still clung to the names of those who had already passed. Grunge, it turns out, was never only about defiant guitar riffs. It was also about the unanswered questions. Was the freedom they sang about ever real? Or was it simply a mask to hide private darkness? Tonight, we retrace 7 scandals that shook the scene, from Nirvana and Courtney Love to the Orwells and Andrew Wood. Nirvana. From an icon of rebellion to a strange accusation. Nirvana was not just a band, they were a storm, pulling America into a cultural revolt. With Nevermind, they carried grunge from Seattle to the entire world, transforming a garage band into a global legend. That album did more than sell tens of millions of copies. It defined the 1990s. But 3 decades later, the same masterpiece was dragged into a completely different spotlight. What was once praised as bold, rebellious art became the center of a sexual exploitation lawsuit, pulling Nirvana's name back into federal court and sparking fierce debate across the media. How could an album celebrated for decades suddenly be treated as evidence in a criminal accusation? Nirvana began in 1987 in Aberdeen, Washington. Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic started with nothing more than a few rough demos and a dream to escape their small town. When Dave Grohl joined as drummer, everything changed. In September of 1991, Nevermind was released. With Smells Like Teen Spirit, the band delivered what became an anthem for a generation, rebelling against MTV pop and consumer culture. The album sold more than 30 million copies worldwide. Its cover, shot by photographer Kirk Weddle, featured a newborn baby, Spencer Eldon, placed in a swimming pool with a dollar bill dangling in front. The image became one of the most recognizable album covers in history. At the time, no one seemed to question it. Critics hailed it as daring art, but time shifted its meaning. In 2021, Eldon, now an adult, filed a lawsuit against Nirvana, their label, and their management, claiming the album cover amounted to child sexual exploitation. The lawsuit stunned the public. A cultural icon was suddenly reframed as potential evidence of abuse. Initially, a federal court dismissed the claim, but in late 2023, the case was reopened, reigniting controversy. Some argued Eldon was only seeking financial compensation, pointing out that he had recreated the photo several times as an adult for magazines and press. Others insisted that motive was irrelevant, that society had been far too lenient in allowing the nude image of a child to be used as art. In that view, Nevermind stood as a troubling example of blind acceptance. The paradox deepened when set against Kurt Cobain himself. In journals published in 2002, Cobain wrote obsessively about his disgust for child abuse and his hatred of those who preyed on the vulnerable. And yet, the work most associated with his name became tied to such an accusation. For fans, this was more than a legal case. It was a fracture in collective memory. An album, once synonymous with freedom and rebellion, was now labeled as evidence. And many were left to wonder, had we been too naive in our embrace of so-called bold art? The courts have not settled the matter. But one thing is certain, Nirvana's legacy has been marked with another shadow. And if this story begins with a controversial album cover, the next tragedy unfolded not in an image, but live on stage. An act of humiliation witnessed by an entire crowd, etched forever into the memory of a female singer. Courtney Love. From a feminist icon to a humiliating memory on stage, Courtney Love was once hailed as the queen of grunge. Her voice was raw, her style untamed, and her gaze seemed to challenge every man who dominated the rock world. But the bitter paradox is this: the woman who dared to tear down every boundary carried within her a memory of sexual humiliation. one that unfolded in front of hundreds of witnesses. Courtney was born in 1964 in San Francisco. Her childhood was far from peaceful. After her parents' divorce, she followed her mother through constant moves, from Oregon to New Zealand. She grew up in hippie communities, exposed early to both art and the harsher realities of street life. By the late 1980s, Love had traveled to England, learning to survive in the underground scene before returning to America to form Hole in 1989. From the start, her music was confrontational, angry, abrasive, yet deeply feminine. In 1991, during a small club performance, Courtney attempted a stage dive. For male rockers, it was a familiar ritual, a way to say, "I am one of you." But when Love leapt, the crowd didn't lift her up. Instead, there was a scramble of hands, her clothes were torn, and she was groped. Those few seconds turned excitement into lasting humiliation, a wound she carried for the rest of her life. Courtney later spoke about the incident in interviews. To her, it wasn't just a stage mishap. It was a brutal reminder of how women were perceived, even at the height of power. The song, Asking for It, released on Hole's 1994 album, Live Through This, was her attempt to process that moment. The track was haunting and confrontational, asking, when a woman steps onto a stage, is she automatically asking for it? Some fans argued that Love exaggerated the story to fuel her art, but many female musicians of the time supported her, admitting they had endured the same treatment during stage dives, or simply by standing under the lights before male crowds. Courtney was different only in this. She turned that pain into a scream no one could ignore. The story becomes even heavier when set against her personal life. At the time, she was under crushing scrutiny in her marriage to Kurt Cobain, who had just become a global star. The press dissected everything: drugs, intimacy, even parenting. Courtney was already burdened with the image of a scandalous female rock star. The stage dive incident cut deeper, proof that even the banner carrier of feminism could be stripped of dignity in a moment of chaos. Today, Asking for It still echoes as one of grunge's most painful scars. It is not just a Hole song. It stands as a cultural indictment of how women were treated in what was supposed to be the freest space of all, the rock stage. For many female listeners, it became a point of recognition, a voice for thousands of silenced experiences. The final paradox is clear. Courtney Love, long dismissed as the most notorious figure of grunge, was also the one brave enough to confront what others ignored. She turned shame into a weapon and music into a demand for control. If Nirvana's controversy began with an album cover dragged into court, then with Courtney Love, the tragedy unfolded live, right there in the roar of the crowd. But scandals in grunge did not stop with personal humiliation. Some tore apart entire careers, ejecting artists from their own bands, as in the case of Matt Mondoniley. Matt Mondoniley. When dreamy music was drowned by accusations, the music of Real Estate was once described as late afternoon sunlight, gentle, soothing, offering calm after the storm of grunge. Yet behind those dreamy melodies, a storm of sexual misconduct allegations would erupt, pulling the band into a crisis no one saw coming. Matt Mondoniley was born in 1985 in New Jersey. He grew up under the lingering shadow of grunge, but leaned toward indie's softer sounds. In 2008, he and a few friends formed Real Estate. Within just a few years, their album Days, released in 2011, propelled them from small clubs to major music festivals. Alongside it, Mondoniley launched his solo project, DuckTales, becoming a familiar name in the international indie world. Then, in 2016, Real Estate announced Mondoniley's departure. The official statement suggested he wanted to focus on solo work, nothing unusual. But months later, the truth came out. The band had severed ties over unacceptable behavior toward women. One by one, women came forward. Some described being forced into unwanted kisses. Others recounted being touched without consent. And still others spoke of being pulled into hotel rooms. Outlets like Pitchfork and Spin published these accounts, transforming whispers into a public scandal. Mondoniley admitted to being insensitive, but denied the more serious accusations. For most, his half-admission only deepened the mistrust. The fallout was swift. Domino Records dropped him. DuckTales tours were canceled. Artists once willing to collaborate quickly withdrew. Within months, a rising career collapsed completely. For many fans, the shock came from the contradiction. Real Estate had always seemed pure. Their music, a refuge of calm. But hidden within that calm was a scandal more unsettling than the chaos of grunge itself. Those who once turned to Real Estate for escape now had to confront a different darkness. Colleagues in the indie scene admitted later that they had heard rumors about Mondanile, but no one expected it to explode publicly. When it did, most chose silence and distance. The paradox of Matt Mondanile was stark. The man who made gentle, harmonious music was cast out of his own community over sexual misconduct allegations. His dream did not collapse because the audience lost interest, but because trust had been broken. And if Mondanile's downfall was about an artist expelled by his own band, the next case takes us back to Nirvana, a song meant to challenge sexual violence, but one that the world misunderstood in a way no one could have imagined. Nirvana, when an anti-rape song was misunderstood. Kurt Cobain never hesitated to speak out against the things he despised most. He was outspoken against discrimination, against violence, and especially furious about sexual assault. Yet the bitter paradox is this: the very song he wrote as a protest against rape would become the reason Nirvana faced heavy criticism. Rape Me was born in one of Nirvana's most tense periods. After the massive success of Nevermind, Cobain wanted the follow-up, In Utero, in 1993, to sound raw and confrontational. In that setting, Rape Me came across with a heavy rhythm and a chorus repeating just 4 shocking words. In interviews from 1993, Cobain explained that the song was an anti-rape message, forcing the perpetrator to face himself. In journals published in 2002, he wrote repeatedly of his disgust towards sexual violence. But the public did not hear it that way. With such a blunt title, the song was often read as mockery. MTV refused to air it. Some critics accused Nirvana of making light of victims' pain. Even at concerts, reactions split. Some cheered it as defiant truth-telling. Others walked out in anger. It revealed a painful paradox. An artist can have the clearest of intentions, but the audience will still interpret through their own lens. In the case of Rape Me, that gap was especially cruel. A song written to defend victims ended up offending many of them instead, and Cobain, despite repeated clarifications, could not control how it was received. More than 30 years later, Rape Me still sparks debate. It appears on lists of rock's most controversial songs, often revisited when people ask about the boundaries between art and social responsibility. To some, it is proof of Cobain's courage. To others, it remains a stain on Nirvana's legacy. A song written to stand against rape instead led to accusations of being insensitive to victims. That paradox still hangs unanswered, and will likely remain a shadow within Nirvana's history. If this was a global controversy born from one song, the next case was far more immediate. A storm of accusations unleashed on social media, pulling an entire band into collapse overnight. That was the story of the Orwells. The Orwells, when social media destroyed a band. If Nirvana's Rape Me sparked outrage because of how it was interpreted, the Orwells faced a very different kind of scandal. Accusations that came directly, publicly, and unmistakably through social media. The band, formed in Illinois in 2009, was hailed as a second generation of grunge for the 2010s. Their album, Disgraceland in 2014, brought them into the spotlight. The press praised them, and some even compared their energy to the early 90s Seattle sound. Their live shows were wild, with crowds jumping and shouting, a rare spark of rebellion in a newer era. But by 2018, it all collapsed. On Reddit and Twitter, accusations poured in against 3 members: Mario Cuomo, Grant Brenner, and Henry Brenner. Allegations ranged from harassment and unwanted photos to assault. Some posts came from people claiming to be victims. others written by friends speaking on their behalf. Within days, the scandal spread across mainstream press. The Orwells denied everything, calling the claims false rumors. But in the age of social media, public accusation alone was enough. Record labels cut ties, tours were canceled, and the band announced their breakup. What shocked many was the speed. In the 90s, such debates might drag out in magazines and newspapers. Here, just a handful of tweets erased a career. The public did not wait for courtrooms. Once trust was gone, the band had no ground left to stand on. The Orwells disappeared as quickly as they had risen. Their downfall became a warning of a new era, one where social media itself could serve as judge and jury, and where a single scandal could end a career overnight. If this was the story of a young band consumed by social media, the next case shifts toward a veteran artist, someone accused not by strangers online, but by women close to him, leading even longtime colleagues to turn away. That is the story of Ken Stringfellow. Ken Stringfellow. When a private past broke a musical bond. Ken Stringfellow was once regarded as one of the most dependable figures in alternative music. A founding member of the Posies, a collaborator with REM and Big Star, he had been part of the music world for more than 3 decades. But in the year 2021, a series of sexual misconduct allegations from women who had once been close to him shattered both his career and the friendships he had built over a lifetime. Born in 1968 in California, Stringfellow first rose to prominence in the late 1980s with the Posies, through Dear 23 in 1990 and Frosting on the Beater in 1993. His career widened when he toured with REM, earning respect across the indie community. But that image shifted in just a matter of weeks when 3 women came forward, claiming they had been coerced into sexual relationships. Their accounts first appeared on KUOW and quickly spread throughout the indie music world. Stringfellow denied the allegations, insisting that all of his relationships had been consensual. But in music, a career doesn't rest on legal outcomes alone. John Ower, his longtime friend and co-founder of the Posies, announced he could no longer share the stage and left the band. Other collaborators also distanced themselves. What many found most heartbreaking was not simply the scandal, but the collapse of a friendship that had lasted more than 30 years. For older fans, the Posies were more than a band. They were part of a generation's memory. And that memory dissolved not because of creative differences, but because of deeply personal accusations. Though Stringfellow continued to deny wrongdoing, the band was no more. A long chapter in alternative music ended in silence, leaving behind a painful question. How much of a musical legacy can remain untouched when shadowed by allegations of abuse? If this was the story of a veteran musician brought down by accusations, the next case was darker still. A young talent whose death came far too soon, leaving behind whispers of a reckless lifestyle. That was Andrew Wood. Andrew Wood, a young talent lost amid rumors. Andrew Wood was once considered Seattle's brightest hope just before grunge exploded. His radiant voice, flamboyant stage presence, and confident charm earned him the nickname Little Elvis. But the painful paradox was this. Just as his career was beginning, Wood died from heroin, leaving behind not only grief, but also lingering whispers about his final days. Born in 1966 in Washington, Wood began with the glam-tinged band Malfunction in the 1980s. In 1988, he joined forces with Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard to form Mother Love Bone. Within only a few short years, they were hailed as Seattle's next great hope, expected to bring grunge to a national audience. Their debut album Apple was scheduled for release in 1990, but Wood never lived to see it. In March of 1990, just days before the album was due, Wood died of a heroin overdose at only 24 years old. His death was a devastating shock to the Seattle music scene and marked the beginning of the tragic chain of losses that would haunt grunge. Friends mourned, and fans grieved the loss of a gifted young singer whose promise was cut short. But alongside the sorrow came rumor. Friends recalled his love of parties, describing endless nights of sex and heroin. Some fans speculated that this reckless lifestyle contributed to his death. No official record ever confirmed such details, but the stories lingered, shaping the way Andrew Wood was remembered, a young star filled with light, but vulnerable to darkness. What is certain is that Wood struggled deeply with addiction. He attempted recovery more than once, but could not escape the cycle. In his last interviews, he still spoke of his dream to become a true rock star. That dream remained unfinished, and his death cast a shadow over the grunge movement that followed. Mother Love Bone disbanded, but from its ashes, Pearl Jam was born. Temple of the Dog, Chris Cornell's tribute project, gave Andrew a musical farewell. These acts proved that despite the rumors, his friends chose to remember him not through scandal, but through music and the promise he embodied. Andrew Wood's life ended far too young, and the truth of his private world will likely remain scattered fragments. But his death opened the first tragic chapter in grunge history. And so, while earlier stories reveal controversy, allegations, and collapse, Andrew Wood's story closes with an unfinished song, leaving us with one lingering question. Are young talents ever truly prepared to face the shadows that come with their own rising light?